Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
All right. So, on this episode of Disrupt Your Career, I'm really happy to be welcoming Carmen Wee. Carmen has a strong track record as a global C-suite business HR leader with over 25 years of international business experience, driving large-scale business transformation and change management within fast-growing companies with multiple complex mergers and acquisitions. She has a portfolio career these days as a board director in several organizations, as a consultant, and as the author of a fascinating book called From the Kampung to the Boardroom, about which we'll hear more later. Carmen, welcome.
Thank you, Claire. Pleasure to be on the call.
Let's start, as we always do, with your career journey. You've been through several pivots and challenges in your career, working in local Singapore, then regional, and finally global roles in HR for significant companies across various sectors. Over the last several years, you also curated a fabulous collection of board positions and wrote a book. Why don't you share with us how this career has unfolded and talk about the relative roles of design and serendipity, and also your key moments of pride and challenge?
I think if I were to summarize my career, I would say that we all know that life is never linear. What we wish that we could have planned to go in a certain way, sometimes it never quite turns out, and we always get surprises along the way. So looking back, I think 1 and 2 decades I've been quite blessed to have, several opportunities that have led me to where I am today. Although, in your young 20s, you desire to say, hey, I'm aiming to retire by 55, because that's the age where we collect our pension in Singapore. And then we want to do this age and, we're going to do this stuff and that stuff. But I think, over the last 10 years, there have been several disruptions, and it's been interesting to take a step back. I think during COVID time, I think I never quite dreamt that I would retire so early, but I feel very good about where I am today. I think 10 years ago, I felt that, I was not going to be a corporate slave anymore. I wanted to eventually start my portfolio career. So I think COVID changed everything. I thought maybe after COVID, I'll go back to my full-time role, etc. But COVID allowed us to do more reflection and self-introspection about what's really important. And I asked myself some very hard questions around why I was not going to go back to my full-time career. And I have had no regrets. So last year, I launched my own company. I was also promoting my book, because coming out of COVID, I decided that I was going to live fearlessly as well from a career standpoint, and spend time, looking after my mother, who since then has, some onset dementia and, some other challenges. So I believe that life, when we try to plan by design, a lot of times we never quite know what life would serve us, right? But, I'm very happy to be doing what I am today, and I'm very blessed, I would say. So yeah, hopefully that serves as a good springboard for our conversation, because we have a lot to talk about.
We definitely do. Thank you. All these different companies that you were in those early and up to COVID years, what would you say are some of the key lessons that you've learned working alongside the leaders of those organizations?
Well, I saw the best leaders, and I obviously saw the worst leaders as well. I think the best leaders had a set of principles that guided them in their day-to-day decisions, whether big or small. So in short, a moral compass, in addition to, I would say, the solid business or technical skills that they have. And invariably, that allowed them to have better engagement with their teams. They were more successful at building high-performance teams, better at spotting talents, because it's not about themselves, but really around how to enable the success of other people. Whereas for the poorer leaders, they tended to be a lot more self-serving. They listened poorly, and they didn't quite, I would say, care about, their teams. It's always about themselves and their agendas, and perhaps their own self-interest around how they could move up from a career standpoint within the company. So I saw the best and I saw the worst. And I think, walking away from them, I felt that I definitely could learn from some of the best and make sure I don't repeat some of the mistakes, right? Or some of the blind spots of some of the poor leaders. I'm not perfect myself, and I always see myself as a work in progress. And so building my own leadership approach to make sure that it's adapted for the current times. And yet doing, HR or business with a heart is extremely important to me. So recently I was with a bunch of people, and, before going into the venture, I was very clear to them that I said, these are my boundaries. And I said, in return to them, what are your boundaries? What's really important to you from an ethical standpoint? Because when you go into business with people, you can flex and change decisions, but certain things cannot change, especially when it comes to some of our own beliefs and principles about how business should be done in an ethical way. And I believe that we can always have good success without compromising some of our own principles.
I love that. That's beautiful. I bet those people that you asked about their boundaries were probably a little shocked, surprised, and didn't necessarily have a ready answer. Because sadly, not everybody seems to think about these things in such a conscious way. That's fascinating. Let's go back a little bit to this big transition from your corporate life to the career that you have now. You've given us a context as to how and why you did it, how and why you initiated the transition. But these transitions tend to be bumpy and a bit unpredictable and not necessarily exactly as you planned them. Can you talk us through the transition itself and how that went?
Coming to the point when I was making the decision and coming to a decision, I think that was the hardest part because, we could have different choices. I could go back to full-time, I could work part-time, or I could fully retire and not do anything, right? Just maybe go to the beach and relax every day, right? And so I realized that I was too young to retire, so that's not a good choice to make. I decided that going back to full-time and working crazy hours was really not sustainable if I was going to keep my mother as one of my priorities. And so, I was left with perhaps a portfolio career. And prior to COVID, I had just started on my board career with one organization and realized that for the last 3 years, I really enjoyed it. And I said that, this could be something that I could pursue more aggressively, and therefore coupled with my book, coupled with maybe doing some consulting, it will give me the flexibility to plan my time and really have, watch over my well-being as well. But coming to that decision wasn't easy because many of my peers and cohorts, they are still working full-time, big companies, holding big jobs, earning good money with great remuneration packages and, having that standing in the market. And so I had to ask myself very hard questions. I mean, is money and all that titling and all that status really important values that I wanted to upkeep in my life? Or I wanted my life to be shaped because there were evolving priorities in my life. It was my mother. And I asked myself, if I only had 10 years with my mother going forward, then the countdown probably starts now, and that's not really a lot of time. And I've been working, crazily, for more than 2 decades. Isn't it time for me to stop and slow down, right? And do something for her because she had sacrificed, right? Like my parents had sacrificed so much for us. So that was a major, difficult decision that I had to make in addition to some other considerations. And I think, as I've always coached a lot of people, that you can always have my life, but, it's not easy to make those decisions because people will come up to me and say, hey, I really enjoy what you're having right now. I say, you could have it too, but you need to have the courage to make some of these difficult decisions because it's not for everyone. That really was a major decision that I had to make. And obviously, making sure that I am marketable from a commercial standpoint, knowing how to run my own consulting business. I mean, that's another skill set that I had to pick up rather quickly, given everything else that had happened. Obviously, develop myself, pick up those skills, talk to people, talk to, my peers so that they were going to become my new clients, right? Or hopefully they will give me some business. So I think everything came quite naturally because I've always maybe not behaved like the typical HR, right? I've always been a business person and I've always dabbled on business on the side. So I kind of know, the drill. And if you read my book, at one point, I was also running one business line with a key account. So over the years, I think, it's always been there, but now, I had to bring the latency to the fore and obviously do something about it. So yeah, here I am, I guess, today.
That's a beautiful story. Absolutely wonderful. As you say, it is an internal and moving set of trade-offs, isn't it? But it sounds as though you're managing it beautifully now. Let's look backwards a little bit, or backwards on behalf of others. If you think about all that you've learned in your own career, and of course your HR expertise, what advice do you have for early career professionals who are looking to start a career in HR? But also I want to give you a double angle to this question and get you to think also about those who are later in their careers who are hoping to become board members like you.
I would say HR is not for everybody. It's not about being nice or just because I like to work with people, therefore HR is for me. In fact, you'll be very surprised. It is actually very far from what you think it is. Most people get into HR and they are very surprised that it did not turn out the way, they expected it because of various reasons, the culture or the leadership that they work with. But assuming that they had decided to work in HR, then I would say that if you really like what you do, and it's very important to like what you do when you don't feel appreciated, but you must believe that HR is a key enabler and a key partner in the business. If you do not believe in that and consciously build the function or be part of a function that is continue to develop value for the business in that area, then I would say that perhaps you're not really getting anywhere. So it's important to understand and be driving value. And so in order to drive value, you must make sure that your skills are continuously updated. And you also have, I would say, coaches and mentor. I think if I were to relive my career all over again, I would consciously go out and get more mentors and coaches right from the outset so that I really preparing for the next role. So it's not just mastering the current role, but always staying ahead of the curve so that you are always ready and prepared for the next role that will come. The third thing that I would say is building, your own personal leadership brand is extremely critical right from the start. And I think when you're young in your career, building your leadership skills will really stand you in good stead as you begin to build the HR career. Because at some point, when you reach the mid-level and when you transit into the senior level, then it's really about who you are because people follow you because of who you are as a person, not so much because of what some hard technical skills that you bring. And for, the ones who are a lot older in their career and want to be board members, I would say you really must have the passion and the interest to be a board member. It's not just about showing up and filling the quotas, but you really must demonstrate the value at the board level and asking very good questions. So do your homework, talk to current board members, and there are many kinds of boards. And to the extent that you can value add, you must also be clear that you are joining the board because they are recruiting you because you are able to fill a need and you're able to add value to them and not because, you are female and you happen to meet the quota. And at the same time, I would say that you must also like the people that you're going to be working with because if you don't like the board members that are going to be working, no point joining a, famous board just for tokenism, right? And I think being yourself, bringing the value that you bring and liking the people that you work with are some of the criteria that I have when I assess whether I'm going to join a board or not.
In the end, if you can't have fun, you're probably not in the right place.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Let's talk about your book. It's called From the Kampung to the Boardroom. Maybe not all our listeners will understand what a kampung is, but I know you're going to share that in your story. It was published in 2021. I'd love to know what your motivation was to write it, what need you're trying to address with it, and what the process was for writing it.
Well, I grew up in Singapore in the 70s. In the UK context, it would be called a village, right? There's no, I would say, sanitary facilities, no flush toilet. And so the soil carrier man would come, right, every other day to dispose of the waste. And I lived, in a cement floor with no tiles, etc. We slept in mosquito-infested houses. So we had the mosquito netting. So that really was the context that I grew up in. And my family was poor. My dad had to, raise 4 children in addition to my homemaker mother. My mother did a fantastic job. She's always been very strict with us. And both of them emphasized, the importance of education. So when I was in my late teens, we moved to our first public housing flat with proper sanitation. But before that, we were, moving in different rental rooms. Actually, a family of 6 staying in one rented room. I mean, you can imagine. And so I grew up with no wealth, no family connections, but just pure determination to make it through school in order to be successful, or at least we try, right, to make life out of what we don't have. And so I wrote the book because I think it's to encourage different people around with my kind of background that one could dream and aspire to get as far ahead as we can, right, with effort and obviously with help of the people around us. And so the book was a way for me to demystify HR, because I don't think there's a book out there that really has told from a personal lens, right, of an HR practitioner, what really goes behind the scenes. I mean, whenever somebody gets a call from HR, it's always go for some challenging conversation, right? But I wanted to just share that HR is more than just showing up and giving you the bad news, the pink slip, or running your payroll. But HR is a very strategic partner based on my own leadership journey in HR. So we cover things like bosses, well-being, going global, the importance of multiculturalism, and staying employable. Hopefully that explains the context of why I wrote the book.
Indeed, indeed. Well, it's also the story of your own leadership journey, isn't it? You call yourself an accidental HR, and you cover a lot of different facets, as you've said. But some of those that struck me were the recessions and inevitable redundancies associated with them. And overall, I guess, what makes a great HR leader? If you were to boil down the ideas of the book to something really crystalline, what would these be?
I would say that, it's vitally important to have your own personal leadership brand. And it's tied very closely to employability. Times are pretty challenging now. And I always get calls from professionals who are laid off or thinking about their transitions or thinking about how to pivot. And I always encourage them. I say, hey, what's your career strategy? You need to have a strategy at different points in your career. And you need to intentionally spend time reflecting on what you're good at and what you're passionate about. And go and seek out those opportunities that would serve both your passion and your skills. And at some point when you transit from, your mid-career to your senior leadership, it's really about who you are and who you stand for. And particularly in HR, because we look at the people side of things, it has to do with the motivations of people. How do you actually bring out the best in your workforce, unleashing the potential, and therefore keenly studying and understanding what makes people tick and what makes the culture. And in order to develop strategies and programs that would enable the best to come out of your workforce, whether it be at the country level, regional level, global level, that is so essential. And so I spend a lot of time, studying that individuals, all the psychometric tools, listening to conversations, and I get very intrigued looking at people's backgrounds, CVs, LinkedIn profiles, and all that, because it tells a story about where they've been and where they're going, or at least where they would like to go. And so that's very important from, a leadership brand standpoint. The second thing is really making sure that you are staying employable, because I believe that with longevity of people and living to maybe the 80s and 90s and maybe the 100-year life, people are going to be very productive, right? Asking somebody to retire at age 50 is very, very premature these days. People may want to, do some meaningful work without having to spend all their time at work. And so what are they going to do for the remaining, 20, 30 years of their life? And so doing something that adds meaning and purpose and significance, whether it be a part-time or a contract role, or maybe a full-time role for a short period of time, I think it's important to help people to put that together. And I think looking at my own portfolio career and how, I've been able to put that together, I think I shared a little bit of that in the book itself. And how do you go about, right, searching for, what really matters. The third thing that I wanted to amplify was I wanted to actually do my small part in raising up the next generation of new HR leaders. In Singapore, we are trying to become a global power base. And so therefore, I hope that we'll be able to raise up more local Singaporeans who aspire to be global HR leaders, so that we really raise the standard in terms of our practice and how we can play a very key role in helping business transformation and company success. So that was really, one of the key reasons why I wrote the book.
Beautiful, lofty goal. Thank you. Sounds as though a lot of what you're describing comes together as this notion that you give a name, job readiness, and you talk about it as an antidote for unexpected career breaks. Could you elaborate on exactly this thinking and perhaps give a concrete example or a practical tip for how to be ready for unexpected career breaks?
Referencing what I said just now about always being ready for the next role, because, the level of disruption now is going to, I would say, for the Gen Zs, is probably going to happen several times in their career cycles. So I always had the mindset that I need to be paranoid. I needed to be paranoid about whether my skills are relevant. And in fact, I still ask myself those questions today. Are my skills really relevant at the board level even, so that I am continuing to add value to the board? But when I was going through my 20s and 30s, I used to be very paranoid and say, hey, why am I staying ahead, right, of my own learning curve so that my skills are contemporary? And in addition to that, am I developing the right networks who can point me in the right direction should I get disrupted? So because I had been disrupted a few times, it has become easier and easier for me actually to build that competency, which, actually started 20 years ago. So when I first got disrupted because of the .com bust, and I was going through my outplacement, help, right? The coach used to tell me I needed to make sure that I reinvent myself to become a very strong business HR that speaks the language of the business. And therefore, that started my journey to intentionally change my reading diet, the way I articulate my value to the business, and the way I support the business as well. So that journey has been going on for the last 20 years. And with every disruption, it has just propelled me in a different direction around bigger roles, more strategic industries, and more strategic roles. So I think, it's important to kind of constantly evaluate yourself. When you are not disrupted yet, are you ready for your next role? What are your skills? And if you got disrupted tomorrow, what's your plan B? And even what's your plan C? The other part that I mentioned in my book is really around the financial health. So I used to be also, making sure that when I was in my 20s, I would say, I'm going to make sure that I save crazily enough so that when I get retired, money is not an issue anymore. I don't have to worry whenever there was a down period. So I think those types of mindset have helped me to stay nimble, employable, and ready so that you always have options. And you're always not at the mercy of some bad leaders who could suddenly show up and say, hey, I don't like you, and therefore you have to go. Because our employment laws are not very, I would say, pro-employee, right? You're pretty much on your own, especially when you're at the senior level.
For sure. So let's talk a little bit about this shifting between business and HR, specifically HR professionals who are given the opportunity to take on a commercial business role. We're very fond of this one, and we wrote an article about the reverse switch a couple of years ago, which was incredibly popular. Business executives who spend some time in the people function. Can you share more about this approach and what you learned from your time in a business role, and how everybody, including boards, I guess, should be learning and thinking about this sort of mutability?
Yes, I've worked with CHROs that did not come from HR backgrounds, and I really believe that every CEO who is going to get appointed should have at least at some point, served some time in HR, because it's all about talent these days. And even with the, ascendancy of AI, it becomes even more critical because the war for talent doesn't stop. I used to have CHROs that did not come from HR backgrounds. I learned a lot from them because they really know, or at least they had teams that helped them to integrate the nexus between business and HR. And so therefore they could, have a very strong partnership with the CEO. I was fortunate enough to be given that business role because I learned so much. And, as I described in my book, it was a really transformational role. I had very little time to think. And so I had to dive and jump right in, right? And the good thing, I suppose, is, for many years as HR, we used to sit in at sales reviews. We know pretty much the drill, questions that the president will ask the sales leader, the pipeline, the opportunities, I would say the confidence level, right, of closing, certain accounts and what was on the customer pain. So for many years, I kind of internalized those, questions. And therefore, when I was given that business role, I jumped right in, and all I had to do was to make sure I learned some parts of the deal management process. Basically went out to talk to the customer At the same time, learn technical pieces of the business and the product and the technology. So that helped me to very quickly be ready to at least try to be credible, with my president and with my customer around what we're trying to do. And as I reflected on that episode after 1.5 years, my president asked me, he said, well, are you keen to actually be the general manager of our business? I was very shocked because I said, well, I don't think so. I think I'll just go back to my HR game. I should have perhaps been more gung-ho, but I think I was trying to play safe. But when I took a step back and I started to think, actually, the HR career prepares you to be a CEO, business leader, because it's all about forming the team, setting the vision, getting them to work together. And, HR leaders understand how do you actually bring out, hopefully, the best and how to talk to customers and basically how to engage with people that maybe you've never met before. The only new thing was really carrying numbers, which was, quite challenging, but I had no choice, but it was a real challenge. And I was happy that I really took up the challenge because I learned so much in that 1.5 years. So in summary, I would say, from the board level, when we think about succession planning, C-suite leaders who have had exposure beyond their technical domain would stand a better stead to be, I would say, a CEO. And you want to test them out in different contexts and to see how they're going to build themselves up. And the teams, especially the HR team, I think that would be one of the biggest challenges anybody could have in their career before they become a CEO.
Absolutely. I and we totally agree that every future CEO should have a stint in HR. Apart from that, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the world of work, what would it be?
If 50% of the workforce were led by women, I'm sure there'll be great challenges.
Yeah. Only
so,
50?
50% is, setting a realistic bar, right? Although it might take quite a while in some geographies. And despite, some Scandinavian countries going to mandate some of these changes at the board level, in parts of Asia, I think we are still playing catch up. So hopefully, 10 years from now, we don't have to be talking about this topic anymore because nobody will be challenging the value that women bring to the boards. And especially, I would say, HR leaders, because I think there's just anecdotal evidence there's no real statistics around how many HR leaders are sitting on boards. And I suspect that the numbers are so few that it's not even measurable right now. But I hope that the 50% would actually becomes the norm for top-notch CHROs to be sitting on boards because it's really about people. I mean, when you think about it, you can have the best products or technology, but if you don't have the people, who's going to make the AI work? Who's going to generate the new codes using the natural languages? It's really the human brain that's going to develop the next frontier for AI.
That is a beautiful and incredibly important objective to have in your sight. I'd just like to say that, maybe the Scandinavian countries are ahead, but the rest of Europe and most of the rest of the Western world is also pretty much as far behind as you are, I think. We've got a lot to do, a long way to go. I'd like to finish on that particular noble aim. Let's keep that in mind. But just to ask you, what is 2024 going to be bringing you? What excitement and motivation is on your horizon for next year?
I am excited about 2024 because I always believe that a new year brings new starts. I'm working with some people now on a venture to hopefully list an AI company on NASDAQ. That, to me, is my biggest and most ambitious project for 2024 and most exciting. That adventure will be interesting. I also believe that, with more opportunities opening up in Singapore-based companies for more board seats, there will be more opportunities for me as an HR leader to be sitting on more strategic boards so that we really, I would say, shape the representation of women, especially HR leaders as well. The numbers are very, very small right now. So I think, with every seat that I secure, I believe that hopefully we can make a difference out there. Who knows, right? What a new year will bring as well. There will always be good surprises and even some challenging situations. But hopefully with our community, we can continue to journey together. It's really about how we can all go into the new year together. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing you ringing that NASDAQ bell. Going to in the year and absolutely join you in the thinking and the action towards better equity, better governance, better leadership. Carmen, thank you. It's been a real pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you, Claire. It's been a pleasure speaking to you too.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.